So I'm really excited to be here and be able to be in community with you all. Welcome again to folks that are just joining. You are here at the Disruptive Advocates Youth at the Forefront of Social Change Youth Panel. Again, my name is Jamileh Ebrahimi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm so excited and honored to be with you all today moderating this panel. Today we get to hear from three powerful young leaders who are playing pivotal roles in the climate, economic, and immigration justice movements. And as we've seen throughout history, or even just 2 nights ago in Oakland, where youth advanced their Vote at 16 campaign by getting it on the ballot, young people are the experts. They bring innovative and creative solutions. They push on us, the adults, to be transformative, radical, and audacious, and if they're not invited to the table, they will make their own table. Young people have and will always play a critical role in movements for justice and for our collective liberation. So today we are so lucky to be in community and sharing space with these three panelists. We have Usha Clark, a co-founder and activist with Youth versus Apocalypse, Amadeos Oyagata, program assistant with MyPath, and Juan Prieto, statewide communication strategist for the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance, also known as CJA. So let's get started. We're going to have each panelist introduce themselves before we get into the questions. They also will be sharing a song that they currently have on repeat that's been helping them to get through the pandemic. And we invite you all to share the song that's helping you get through this time in the chat box. Isha, you want to get us started?
Yes, ma'am. Hey, everybody. This is so exciting. There's 170 people in here. My name is Usha Clark, as she said. And again, I'm a co-founder and activist with Youth versus Apocalypse, which is a climate justice organization in the Bay Area. And you know, what's really unique about Youth versus Apocalypse and why I'm a part of this work is because of our analysis, which is that fundamental systems of white supremacy and racism and colonialism and greed are what fuel climate change and are what have created this climate crisis and is literally what has brought us to the brink of mass extinction. And so if humans want to continue to be able to exist and live on this planet, then we need to dismantle systems of oppression for our own survival. We need to build solidarity for our own survival. And we need to imagine a world that is built on justice and equity in order to be able to live in a sustainable world. So that's why I do this work. And that's really what Youth versus Apocalypse is. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm excited to talk more.
Do you want to share your song?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Thank you. I could not pick a specific song, but I have been having Erykah Badu on repeat for this entire crisis. Danger, On and On, Apple Tree, all of that, just everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isha. Pass it off to Amadeos.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for this amazing opportunity to talk about youth organizing and advocacy. I'm really hyped to be here right now. A little bit about myself. So my name is Amadeos Oyagata. I was born and raised in San Francisco in the Mission District on 24th Street. Currently, I'm a social welfare major and minor public policy at the University of California at Berkeley. I'm going into my senior year. And I'm involved in this advocacy efforts such as economic inclusion for undocumented workers, but also for young people that grow up in low-income communities. And I do this work with organizations like MyPath that are empowering today's young leaders, policymakers, and advocates to build a greater youth financial inclusion in their communities. The reason why I'm so interested in this work is because, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the Mission District in San Francisco. To give you an idea of what that looks like is that the Mission District is known for having predominantly low-income residents, and it's kind of a struggle growing up there as a young person. But because my indigenous identity grew up in this diverse community, I was really able to find opportunities to kind of take myself out of this cycle of poverty. not only myself, I'm working to do that not only for myself, but for other young people out there that are going through similar situations and are under the same circumstances. So I believe that young people should have access to quality financial services and education in order to create healthy economic pathways for their lives. I'm excited to talk about all this amazing work, and I will give you my song that has been keeping me going through this this pandemic. It is "Sacrifices" by Earth Gang and J. Cole. It's a really dope song. I like it because of its lyrical complexity and its music. It just hits on a deeper level, and it keeps me kind of going during these hard times. So it's really cool. Go ahead, check it out. It's "Sacrifices" by Earth Gang and J. Cole.
Amadeos, Juan.
Everyone, thank you so much for having me and giving us the opportunity to share some of the work that we all share and do collectively. As mentioned, my name is Juan Fiat. I'm a communication California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance. We're a statewide undocumented-led organization that has young undocumented folks across the state of California fighting for the liberation of all migrant communities. And so a little bit about myself. I was born in Mexicali, Mexico, and came to this country when I was 8 and have been living undocumented since then. I've lived all over California, which kind of gives me a pretty good analysis as a statewide communication strategist. I try to incorporate a lot of digital strategies into the work we do. I think that's actually something that young folks do so well, right? We tweet so well, we Instagram so well, so why not use it to liberate our communities, right? And so that's what I sort of try to incorporate a lot into the movement work that I do. So to me, you know, and to many of the young folks that we work with, it's not just about, you know, these band-aid solutions, right? We're an abolitionist organization, so we believe that we need to protect the most criminalized in order to liberate our communities. That the same apparatus that criminalized Black and Brown communities in the 80s through the war on drugs is the same propaganda of criminalization that's now demonizing migrant communities in this country today, right? That same justification for throwing folks in prisons is now justifying throwing folks into detention facilities. And it has the same role, it plays the same kind of framing, right? It does the same thing for this country that the prison industrial complex does. And so to us, it's not just about getting rid of detention facilities, it's also about fighting with our comrades in criminal justice groups to ensure that prisons are also closed down. That's why for us it was so important last year that when we pushed for AB 32, which banned private detention facilities in the state of California, that we incorporated prisons as well, because you can't really solve the issue if you're just kind of solving the surface level problem. Like the core issue here is the prison industrial complex, because then it's just going to replicate itself and try to attack different communities. So to us, that's the sort of analysis we use into the movement work that we do. And a lot of the young folks that we work with have DACA and others don't have DACA. But one thing is for sure, our commitment is to protect those who are the most vulnerable, and those who are the most vulnerable are those who are being criminalized to this day. So thank you so much for having me. I look forward to sharing more about the work that we do.
If I may add, I can't believe I forgot to say this, but I am born, raised, and educated in Oakland, California. I just had to put that out there.
Thank you. Ditto, same for me too. So before we get started, we have some preset questions for the panelists. But as you can see in the chat, we will have some time towards the end of the panel to take questions from you all. So please please put your questions in the chat box and start it off with the word question so we know that it's a question for the panelists. And I do want to go back to Juan to see if you want to share your song.
It's a whole album called Moctezuma by a band named Porter from Mexico. It kind of like talks a lot about migration and just the complexities of being a people born out of colonization and combating, right, that racial undertones of that, but also the journey, right, of migration. And so in a very abstract way, it covers so much of the inner turmoils, I feel.
Thank you all. So we're going to get started and transition to the panel. I think we all are aware in the times that we're in, and what I'm hearing from community, on the news, anytime I'm talking to someone, and that's we're already starting to see this is the COVID-19, and this pandemic is going to have extreme long-lasting impacts on our communities, the economy, and even just how we live our day-to-day life. So we just want to take a moment to hear from the panelists, like, what are you already seeing and hearing on the ground with your communities? And so I'll start with Juan. Is how has COVID-19 impacted the immigrant and undocumented community?
Yeah, there's multiple ways in which undocumented folks have been impacted by this. I think in the first few weeks that we started going into sheltering in place, we saw the economic impact of this, right? A lot of undocumented folks were losing their jobs, and there wasn't any form of state support at the time, right? And so there was a frantic attempt to try to gather as many resources as possible across the state of California so that we could ensure that folks had at least access to food. We were getting information as to, like, can undocumented folks seek medical assistance, right? And so informing individuals that they could qualify for emergency Medi-Cal in the state of California. And then, and whenever there was no monetary support, we started creating it, right? So here in the Bay Area, we teamed up with organizations such as Centro Legal to start our fund, which was specifically to raise money to create resources for undocumented folks. Now, of course, we do have a state-sponsored support for undocumented folks, but there's also concerns with that, right? They gave the labor of passing this money out to already thinned out nonprofits, right? And so now you're seeing a lot of individuals still struggling to receive those funds. And so to us, it's important that we continue to advocate for those who are still in need of resources, and push beyond the limitations of the financial assistance that they've received. So there's that part of it, and that's where we dedicated a lot of our time and energy. We centralized a lot of these on our website, cja.org, to ensure that there is a central location for folks to go to receive information and resources as it pertains to COVID-19. On the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, we fought last year to ban private prisons and detention facilities here in the state of California. And so this year we were going to focus on the implementation process of that, but then COVID-19 happened, right? And it kind of expedited that work, because you cannot practice social distancing while being detained 100 people to a room, right? ICE was not giving individuals inside detention facilities gloves, masks. They weren't giving them sanitary items. They were not taking any precautions necessary to protect them, because at the end of the day, a law enforcer is not a doctor. A law enforcer is not a nurse. They're not equipped to protect our community. And so slowly what we started seeing is the spread of fear within folks who are inside these detention facilities. And now COVID has reached them. We've lost lives to COVID-19, even though we've told ICE continuously that folks need to be released, that there's actually no need to detain individuals while they fight their legal battles. And so while the disease began to spread inside many of these detention facilities due to the lack of medical negligence that ICE has, and these private corporations who run these detention facilities continue to enact, we began to fight to liberate them. We began to create public pressure online, call-in campaigns, digital campaigns to pressure ICE to release individuals. And so, 2 weeks ago, we successfully pressured the Mesa Verde detention facility in Bakersfield to release all the women who were detained there because of COVID-19 fears. And so that's kind of where a lot of our energy is going to at the moment. And if folks want to engage with some of that campaign, they can just go on our social media handles at CJA and follow our Free Them All campaign.
And I know those have been dropped in the chat box, and yes, we need to free them all. I want to pass it off to Amadeos to share how has your community been impacted by COVID-19?
Thanks for asking that question. So the community I work with, well, as a program assistant at MyPath, I work with a group of young people, a group of 22 youth from high schools in San Francisco that all come from low-income backgrounds. So this community of youth and families, as Juan mentioned earlier, that there is an economic impact on undocumented workers as well as adults, but we can see that there is also this dramatic impact on young people themselves. And because of this COVID-19 situation, we've had to adjust our meeting strategies. And we've heard a lot of the stories of our young people, of what's really going on. With one young person in particular, she said that her mom used to work 2 jobs. She worked as a housekeeper for a hotel and worked at a restaurant at night. But because of COVID-19, she lost both her jobs. And she would never hear her parents talk about money out loud, except maybe when rent was due. But now things are kind of shifting. Going to the grocery store, she noticed her mom actually counting her money, seeing how much she might have to spend if she can find a cheaper alternative elsewhere. And her dad has been struggling with keeping his store hours open at his deli that he owns. So a lot of families are struggling right now, and this theme is constant with a lot of our youth. And our youth want to help families by buying food, paying rents. But in order to do this, youth need to have jobs. And we saw that so there's another problem too with our young people. Youth are losing jobs. Access to youth workforces and employment opportunities are not there. The first person to be laid off from a essential job is typically a young person. So there is a lot of economic insecurities rising that we're seeing. And the interesting thing is that it is because of COVID-19, but it's also because of troubling existing policies that are already in place. These policies have already been in place. They're only coming to light because of COVID-19. So because there's that same issue in this youth organizing that we're in, our youth are kind of leading this sort of policy change because there's such need. That's kind of how we've seen it impact our young people right now in San Francisco.
Thank you. I want to ask Isha to also share. I know you're doing work around climate issues that's global, but also you're grounded in Oakland. So what has been the impacts on young people and your community in Oakland?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think the first thing about that is the same communities who are on the front lines of environmental injustice and climate impacts are low-income communities of color and indigenous communities. And those are the exact same communities that are at the front lines of this COVID pandemic that we're experiencing right now. And so I feel like that goes back to this piece of, that the solution is dismantling these larger systems of oppression, because what's happening is that we keep experiencing these crises like climate change, like the border crisis, like the COVID-19 pandemic, like economic disparities, like just so much stuff is happening in our society because we live unsustainably. And all of these crises are unearthing all of the disparities that already exist in our society and are making them worse and even more harmful to communities. And so that's something that we've seen. And specifically for the young people that I'm organizing with, it's really impacted our organizing because the climate movement was gaining a lot of momentum because we were having these this mass mobilization, and now we can't do that in the flesh anymore. And so we've had to figure out, how do we continue to use the energy that was developed online, because that's the only method of action that we have right now. And so which was supposed to be another mass climate strike, Youth versus Apocalypse organized a campaign called No One is Disposable. And so this campaign was meant to highlight exactly what I keep saying, and I will keep saying because it's so important, which is that at a fundamental level, our society does not value human beings. And that is what we are fighting. And so we have to all come together, all stand together to undo that and to address that, and to create a world where people can live equally and in practices of equity and have a place to live and food to eat and access to adequate health care and aren't dying at crazy rates from these natural disasters that are happening and the pandemic. Just, there's just so much chaos. And it all goes back to this idea of the solution being that no one is disposable. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you're going to take us into the next question. I just feel like so much of our organizing, our healing, our resiliency work that we do and that our ancestors have done has really been centered in our ability to be in direct relationship with one another, being face-to-face, if it's in a meeting, a strategy session, breaking bread together, out in the streets protesting. And over the last 2+ months, we've had to break away from that. We've had to do everything we can do to help flatten the curve, to be able to protect our loved ones, protect our community, and shelter in place. And it's had impacts on our work and how we do the work that we do. And I know, Isha, you started sharing some of what you have done to move, to continue to your work, but still be able to meet the needs and continue to push on the systems. Do you want to continue sharing anything else that you've already been working on and how you've adapted your organizing to the moment?
I did kind of combine those two questions. I think the second piece of that question that I'll address now, because I already kind of talked about the first part, is we are living through a collectively traumatic experience. And this pandemic is certainly impacting different communities in different levels, and that definitely needs to be acknowledged. But every single human being that is alive right now is experiencing something traumatic. And on top of that, we're already moving closer and closer and closer to extinction. And so, like, no human being has ever, in the history of human existence, has ever experienced something like this. And so we have to acknowledge that this is where we are, and that, yes, there is so much work that needs to be done, and we need to work our asses off to make sure that we stop this crisis, that we get resources into communities that need it, and that we change the world. But we also have to move in a way that respects the time that we're in, and that really respects we all need to take a breath and really acknowledge what we need in this moment. That might be food, that might be meditation, that might be, I need to step off this call for a second because I'm getting stressed out and I need to relax and watch Netflix for a second. We need to do that. Yes, you can be a revolutionary and still lay in your bed and watch Netflix for a full day. Like, that is a part of healing, that is a part of organizing. And so, yes, when we're a part of this larger transition to moving activism to being online, and we're in a time where we really need to do a lot of big changes and things that are really hard, but we also need to make a commitment to take care of ourselves and to take care of the people around us, because that's what's going to get us through, and that's what's going to allow us to make radical change.
Yes. Amadeos, I know a lot of your work is connected to what Isha was just talking about, around supporting communities and meeting their basic needs of having a roof over their head, having food on the table, being able to support their families. And a lot of that work usually happens in person. How has your work been impacted due to the shelter in place, and how have you continued to meet the needs of your community?
Right. So our organization with the work that I do with our young people to create a campaign and expand financial capability to other youth really required us to like meet in person and have these sort of meetings. But this is where we really showed how we can keep physical distance, but also social solidarity and advocacy, which we still practice. So the dynamics of that came with in-person meetings where there was natural flow of conversation, where we would be able to gauge different minds and creativity, it wasn't as present. We moved into Zoom. We were lucky enough to move into Zoom. A lot of organizations might have had that kind of tech problems, but we were able to kind of pivot into that. But that those dynamics that I talked about, the engagement and creativity, it became more structured in a way. That's what I noticed moving into Zoom meetings. But it was also it also created an opportunity where we can talk about the impact of COVID on our young people's lives. As I mentioned, the new reality that surfaced of employment, youth workforce, summer paid internships, all closing, and seeing that there's a new need. So the need before was to get young people knowledge around money management, credit building skills, not only the knowledge, but also the tools, which were their own non-custodial accounts and a credit building product. So they can one day reach their goal of buying a car or buying a house one day. That was the need that we saw before, that young people were deprived of that. But now the need has included a basic income. So there's an idea of financial capability support. We can support you to reach your goal, but what if you don't have an income coming in? So we've had to pivot and talk to our young people about what is it that we want to campaign for now. And so this idea of basic income, we've started to brainstorm more on solutions, and we came across an idea of universal basic income. For those that have heard of this idea or have not heard of this idea, universal basic income is a monthly check of a certain amount of money goes directly to your pocket, and you use it however you like. It's been proven to take people out of poverty, and it's been proven to be effective in that way. The argument for that was because of technological changes taking jobs away, but also our young people are not having the jobs either to really get them out of poverty and into economic stability, economic mobility. So we're really trying to pilot this new this new campaign. We see that Santa Clara, places like Oakland too, are starting to think about these ideas. So MyPath really wants to start this going on in San Francisco too. That's kind of the way that we've been responding. We've really been supporting our young people through this whole pandemic, and we want to come out the other side to really bring more economic opportunities for our young people.
Thank you. And I know, Juan, for CJ, you all are a statewide organization. So I imagine a lot of your work is done online, but also has been impacted by COVID. So it'd be really great for you to share how you've adapted to this moment, but also if there's any new strategies you've been testing out or any strategies you've been deepening to really advance the work of your organization.
Definitely. We have been always a very digital heavy organization. A lot of our advocacy for deportation defense campaigns or participatory defense campaigns have used digital media to pressure people to call in and support our campaigns. And so with this crisis, this current crisis, you saw now there was a larger audience that was consistently online looking for something to do. And so at the same time, there were so many different calls to actions being thrown on the digital sphere, bombarding people with like different calls to actions and different numbers to call. And so what we thought was like, what can we do to ensure that at this moment, we free as many immunocompromised people as possible from detention facilities, utilizing the fact that there's a lot of people engaging online. So we developed graphic styles that were a lot less stressful, right? Because so many folks are so stressed right now. And I think, as Isha shared, like, there's so many ways in which what's happening now is impacting us personally, that folks are not taking care of because they're so focused on the responses that we have to do, that we wanted to honor that as well, right? So what are some colors that can maybe even calm someone down, right? And so we really looked into the color schemes that we were using, and to ensuring that we weren't stressing out folks with information that was already pretty stressful, right? That folks were dying in detention facilities because of COVID-19. And so that's sort of the design thinking that we used behind our Free Them All campaign, when we were pushing to not just free all the women at Mesa Verde, but free men who are immunocompromised, all of which we were able to free, all the men who were a part of our campaign. And so that's something that we employed immediately. Another thing that I think was looking at opportunities, right? What were the kind of opportunities this were presenting? On the one hand, the beast had its mask taken off. You now could not hide the fact that the country disproportionately neglects Black and brown communities, right? You cannot deny that anymore. It is evident that a mask has been removed, right? We're seeing Oz, and it's just a skinny white man pulling strings, right? Now we know who's doing all of this. And so I think it's also ensuring that as people are seeing all of this, we highlight that, we point to that, to ensure that that framing isn't lost, right? As we move forward through all of these crises. And then another opportunity we saw was being able to work with hunger strikers on the inside of detention facilities. So because we were now normalizing just strategizing through phone calls, it just became so easy to incorporate and bring in people who were leading hunger strikes inside detention facilities into our strategy sessions. And that allowed us to get so much more intel than we were able to create before. They were the ones telling us, hey, target this specific warden. They're really stressed out because we're hunger striking. They're really stressed out because the ACLU is suing them, and they're gonna be really stressed out if you all bombard them with emails and phone calls. And so we just designed the graphics and we posted it all over the internet. The community began to call en masse, and before we knew it, we were able to free the women and all the men who were immunocompromised who were a part of our campaign. And so although there is so much that we try to honor, right? To us, self-care is so important. It's actually why last week, all of our staff and all of our organizers, we took it off. We took it completely off despite all of the crises we're facing, because we're always gonna be facing a crisis. We're living in white supremacist America. We're consistently gonna be battling that. And so it's necessary for us to take a step back, take a break, rest. And I'm now feeling so much like stronger, so much ready, like more prepared, right? To combat the systems that we're trying to dismantle. And it was because we honored the fact that this pandemic is affecting us, right? That as we're talking about protecting and creating resources for undocumented immigrants who might be losing their jobs, that's our parents, right? It's not just this abstract, it's happening to someone, it's actually happening to us, right? And honoring that, we decided to take that week off. And so after that, just kept telling everyone, like, when's your next week off? When's your organization gonna take a week off? And normalizing that, normalizing the fact that we can take a step back, because I think there's a specific guilt that, oh, well, I'm getting paid, I shouldn't be taking a break from this work. I should just be continuing to produce, continue to create. But that's not effective. I honestly think that all the crises we're dealing with and have been dealing with under Trump are a strategy to burn us out, because he might win again. And if the vanguard against our communities is burnt out by the beginning of his second term, who's gonna protect us? And so please, yeah, I want to reiterate what Isha shared, like to take time, take space, make space for yourself. If you're the leader of an organization, or if you have a strong tie into those kinds of decisions in your organization, start thinking about lengthy breaks to ensure that your staff, your organizers, your people are being taken care of.
Yes, definitely. I would like to double down on what both of them have shared. We also at RYSE, we've instituted restoration weeks. So similar to what you just shared, and it has been beyond helpful for kind of refreshing us and supporting staff's mental health and wellness. This work is hard. What we do on a daily basis, what we're faced with on a daily basis, is some of the hardest things people can go through. And so definitely we have to be gentle with ourselves. We are tender beings. We need to take care. But you mentioned the word normal and how we need to normalize things. And so much of what people are saying is like, oh, this is our new normal, being socially distancing or being away from each other. This is our new normal. And then you also, on the flip side, you have folks who are trying to organize and push on systems for us to not go back to the old normal. And we've heard from you all around what you are doing today on the ground, what you continue to do in your communities. But what we want to do before we close off and transition to taking questions from the audience is, what is the world we're working towards? What is your vision for your community, for the world post and beyond COVID-19? How are we going to get there? And specifically, what is the role that young people and youth organizing is going to play to get us there? So I actually want to leave it up to you all to simmer on and see who would like to go first. I'm not going to call on anyone.
So this idea of a vision for the future is something that I love thinking about possibilities, especially when it comes to the new opportunities for our young people. This vision that I have is that state and local government right now that are addressing the needs of adults, they now see that the needs for our youth are just as important. And so now that they see that there's such an economic impact for our young people, that once we are in a post COVID-19 world, we don't forget about our young people. I think that that's the importance here, youth at the forefront of social change. I believe that our leaders, which are adults, but also our advocates, they include our young people when it comes to making these power decisions. And for youth organizing, I see youth organizing is going to continue to address these needs for our young people, these economic needs. For those who have not really heard us about young people that are also struggling with their financial futures, they're hearing us now. So we'll still be addressing this in the future. And for young people that may have not understood how economic inequality impacts their lives, this crisis has really brought about a level of humility in adults, but also in young people. So I see our future is promising much advocacy and unity to really bring to light this vision of economic justice. That's kind of what I have to say. And I also want to put it out there. Earlier, I spoke on universal basic income, this idea of financial capability. If you want to learn more about this or are interested in partnering maybe a pilot for this, please feel free to email me at amadeos@berkeley.edu. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Isha, you want to take us, or you want Juan?
I can go. I think no one has a bigger stake in the future than the youth, right? Because we're going to be handling whatever mess they left behind. And so I think it's important that as older folks are making decisions, right, as they're making these decisions at ballot boxes or decisions if they have a position of power, that they consider the voices of the youth and what we're saying, right? And I'm an abolitionist, so I don't believe there should ever be a normal. I don't want to go back to the old normal. I don't want this to be the new normal, and I don't want there to be a normal in the future, because that's when we become stagnant as a society. I think we should be consistently allowing the voices of the youth to challenge and shift the way in which we make decisions as we move forward as a society. Because once we start normalizing anything, I feel like any kind of oppression that we weren't able to resolve will become the same systematic problem that we've been facing to this day, right? And so to me, it's important that we don't normalize anything at all, right? It might sound like such a heavy burden to carry, but it's a carry that there's a burden we all carry collectively, intergenerationally, that has been carried for generations before us and will be carried for generations after us, right? So I think it's important that we kind of, let's normalize that, not having a normal. So because I see the world that we want to build. I see the world that the young folks I work with want to build. I saw it when they freed all the current youth abolitionists, the young undocumented organization we work with in Kern County, when they worked diligently to free all those women from Mesa Verde, right? Those young folks who said, I'm gonna do everything in my creative power to free them, right? I saw the vision of the future there, the vision of the future that they want. And so I think it's important that we kind of approach the work that we do every single day in consistently thinking about what are the new changes we need to create, what are the shifts in our society that we need to adapt, and who better to guide us than young folks, right? Who are being introduced to a new framing, a new way of understanding the world that perhaps is escaping older folks because, you know, they've already sort of established their own normality throughout the years of navigating this movement work.
Beautifully said. I think, you know, I feel like people are always like, young people are our future and they're gonna save us. And like, yes, that's definitely true. But I think it's also important to recognize that young people are the present and that we're already making change right now. We're already shifting things and conversations right now. Young people said, y'all didn't do it right, so now step aside and we're gonna make you do something, because I'm not trying to inherit a broken world. I don't want that. I don't want that for my peers. I don't want that for my future generations. Nah. So I just had to say that first. But I also think it's important to very specifically say that we need youth who are on the front lines to be our leaders and to be guiding our vision of what the future is, and to be the visionaries who are inventing things and pioneering solutions and holding positions of power. Because if we don't have young people who have deeply experienced the systems of oppression that we're trying to dismantle, then we're going to inevitably perpetuate these same systems. And so we really have to hold up young people of color, indigenous young people, young people from low income backgrounds, so that they can scream and shout and make change and call for what they need. And so I believe that the role of young people for the future and for right now to make change in the future, whatever that looks like, is to be visionaries, is to be revolutionaries, is to call out what is wrong and what needs to be done, because we'll tell it how it is. I think that's why we're here.
You will. I'm just so excited and about the panel, and we're actually going to transition to taking questions from you all from the chat box. We have a couple questions, and I know we won't have time to take all of them, so I do want to encourage you all. The contact info for all of us is in the reception area. We'll also be sharing a slide at the end that will have everyone's contact information, so you can get ready to take a screenshot of that at the end of the panel. So if you want to follow up with any of the panelists and support their work, we'll take some questions, and we'll start off with one, and this is from the chat box. About informing documented community, the disaster relief fund, when there's been a historical distrust in government.
Yeah, no, that has been a consistent issue that undocumented folks have dealt with, even with DACA, right? And so to us, we prioritize mutual aid on our website because that's what we were creating at first, right? We were gathering resources that folks were creating on the ground, and then directing them to them and the different nonprofits that were working with them throughout the state of California. I think with this current new wave of support coming from the state of California, folks are, I think it's a similar strategy. It's why they've reached out to nonprofits to be the people to reach out to communities, because there's a trust that's already been created by some of these nonprofits across the state with the undocumented community. So it gets rid of a lot of that anxiety that undocumented folks might have had if perhaps if they had to apply for to the state, right? If they had to apply for support through the state, it'd be a completely different anxiety than, oh, it's through Asian Law Caucus, I think, or Mission Asset Fund, right? Like this is a different sort of avenue as opposed to reaching out to the state. And I think that's done away with a lot of those specific anxieties. But generally speaking, whenever it does come to any kind of relief for undocumented folks, there's an initial hesitation to look for support, and rightly so, right? And I think for us, it was also important to let them know that all of the resources that we had on our website that they could have access to had nothing to do with the public charge ruling that came from the Trump administration that was made to make them afraid to apply to any kind of support from the state. And so it was ensuring that folks knew that first and foremost. And so because we're not too heavily involved in the dissemination of the state funds, that hasn't really been a lot of our role. Our role was, like I mentioned, creating mutual aid support by doing online fundraising and then supporting nonprofits in disseminating that money. And because we've already built this trust with our community, that facilitated folks applying and being able to receive their funds adequately. But yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And then we have a question for you, Isha. How do some of the national environmental organizations support you in your work, and how do they get in the way?
This is a great question. I think that national climate justice organizations have really large networks and a lot of resources that I think we have benefited from, and they've gotten our voice out there, which has been really great. They have the power to elevate necessary voices in the movement. But I think the challenge is that the national organizations tend to be very white. And they also tend to be organizations of young people who are in their late 20s, sometimes early 30s. And no hate at all, but there's a very different experience of being a middle and high school student and being out of college and working, or even in college. And so I think that causes sometimes this hierarchy and these power dynamics that come into play. And I think that also goes for these dynamics of white privilege, and all of these social systems are so deeply ingrained in our society that they even find their way into the movement. And so that's also part of the work of Youth versus Apocalypse, is to not only push the movement forward, but to also do that work within the movement to undo these systems of white supremacy that find their way in. And so I think that is especially relevant when talking about national organizations, because they're just so big and it leaves more room for all the systems to get in there. So that's some difficulty that I've experienced, but there's also a lot of power in working with them.
I feel so sad that we are at less than a minute to the end of the panel, and I want to make sure everyone gets the contact information for the panelists. So I'm going to pull that up, but I also want to close the panel by just appreciating everyone who joined us today, to appreciate the panelists for taking the time to share with us all about their work and the organizing that they're doing, and appreciate everyone for joining. And then also special shout out to the Greenlining Institute team that supported to make this panel happen. So thank you, Christian, thank you, Isela, and everyone else for joining us and for being here with us today.